More evidence that the Trump administration is ramping up its assault on women's access to health care. But we're also seeing more people fighting back. The Hill reports that more than 70 pro-women's groups are asking the Trump administration to call off the planned destruction of roughly $10 million of usable birth control products being held in a stockpile in Belgium. And we're also seeing resistance here at home. Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs from California is now pushing for IVF coverage for military families. She introduced legislation this year that would require military health care to cover all fertility treatments for service members and their families, including in vitro fertilization and egg freezing. And Congressman Sarah Jacobs joins us now. So, Congresswoman, I'm actually surprised, it's ignorance on my part, that the military health care, which is usually quite good, doesn't cover IVF for our service members. And considering that the Trump administration espouses to be pro-family and pro-military, I would think that this legislation would be a slam dunk. Can you talk about what you're pushing for?
Absolutely. So right now under TRICARE, the military insurance program, the only way that you can get IVF or fertility treatments covered is if you can prove a service-connected reason for your infertility, which is really, really hard to do, right? It's basically like if your parts are blown up or something. But we actually know that military families experience higher rates of infertility than your average family. 1 in 4 military families reports infertility. And so what this bill would do is that it would say that, you don't have to prove service connection. If you're a service member or dependent, you have access to the full range of fertility treatments from, preservation to IVF. And I'm really excited. We were able to get it in this year's National Defense Authorization Act, which passed the House floor this past week. And now we're working to make sure that it stays in the final version after conference. And, we got this close last year and Mike Johnson took it out because of his, very anti-abortion, I would argue, very crazy ideas about IVF and what, constitutes abortion. But we're hoping that since President Trump has been such an outspoken supporter of IVF, that he'll help us keep it in this time.
Congresswoman, you've spoken in the past a bit about your own experience, your own fertility journey. Can you tell us a bit about how that's inspired you to do this work now? I know for so many women friends of mine who've been through it, speaking about it is sort of part of how they open the doors and invite other people to strategize about solutions with them. So I'm curious if you can share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm 36 years old. I froze my eggs. I froze a batch of them in my first term in Congress. And then when I turned 36, went and talked to my doctor and, she thought it made sense to freeze some more since I wasn't ready to have a family right now. But I know that I do want to have a family one day. And I feel like it's really important to talk about this publicly because I'll be honest, with my friends, like egg freezing, fertility, all this stuff is like what we talk about all the time. But when I'm in Congress, many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle just don't even know about these things at all, right? It's no secret that this Congress is the 3rd oldest Congress in history. Obviously, a lot of these technologies were not around when folks were in their reproductive years. And so, I feel really strongly that in talking about it, we are destigmatizing it, but also we're not going to get good policy if people don't even know what it is. And actually this talking about it publicly is what inspired this bill for military families, because I represent San Diego, the biggest military community in the country. And I was at a roundtable with service members shortly after talking about my first experience freezing my eggs. And a young servicewoman came up to me and said, I read your story. It was so inspiring. I really wish I could do something like that before I deploy. And I realized this is something that, everyone should have access to, but at the very least, our service members should. And, given that we're in the triple minority and there's not a lot of hope of getting sort of a mass IVF, fertility mandate coverage for all insurance passed, we thought starting with military families might be a good first step that could help incentivize private insurers to cover it for everyone as well.
Congresswoman, I really appreciate you sharing your personal story with us. I wanted to, if I could, pivot to something else that I know you've talked about a lot, and that has to do with foreign policy. This week you posted, which I thought was very powerful, this is the worst resume I've ever seen about Donald Trump seeking the Nobel Peace Prize. Elaborate, if you will, in the context of Trump's foreign policy about him being the self-proclaimed peace president, and why in his first couple of months of office, or his first 10 months in office, he has made a compelling case why he does not deserve the Nobel Peace Prize.
Look, President Trump campaigned on being the peace president, and I think he tapped into a very real feeling among Americans that our sort of bipartisan foreign policy consensus was not necessarily serving them. And I feel that really deeply, right? I represent the biggest military community in the country. I'm also one of the youngest members of Congress, right? Like, I was in middle school when September 11th happened, and we're still dealing with the consequences of the decisions that were made right after that. And, you know, I actually was hopeful that maybe, this, push to get a Nobel Peace Prize, this idea of being the peace president, would move our foreign policy into a better direction. But unfortunately, it's not what we've seen. First of all, he's decimated all of our foreign assistance, which we know is one of the most effective things we can do in order to prevent conflict. And he's launched unauthorized strikes in Iran against, a cartel boat off the coast of Venezuela, has threatened to do the same in other places around the world, including in Mexico, which will really impact San Diego, which is also a border community that has a lot of stuff that we do with Mexico across the border. And at every turn, instead of actually doing what needs to be done in order to solve some of these really tricky conflicts, he has done the opposite. And so, the cherry on the top is renaming the Defense Department, the Department of War. I'm going to introduce a bill to rename the State Department the Department of Peace. Maybe it'll help us get some more funding for diplomacy and development and the things we know actually help prevent war. But, it seems that he's clearly not actually following through on his idea of being the peace president.